friend Glennon Doyle saw you recently. She, the girl, and
it's so exciting that there are three of us up here.
I know. She was like, every time Gloria and I took a photo together earlier, and they were like, okay, the two of you get together, she'd whisper to me, the three of us. And I was like, okay. And, but I loved the answer that she shared with us, which is that you said, I'm paraphrasing, but you said something along the lines of, don't tell her anything, listen to her, that's how she knows she has something to say. And I thought that, yeah, right? And I thought that was such to open up the idea of speaking and listening with young people too, because gender is a school space.
Not the boss of me. And that's the big
I want to talk about of escaping age segregation, which that are intergenerational, create diverse spaces, because I truly do believe that movements don't move unless they are intersectional, and I do often feel that age discrimination gets left out of the conversation very often. And I love any advice you have for anyone in this room, and if you want to do a little inventory and think of, do I have friends who are in my 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, what kind of advice do you have for people on creating stronger intergenerational bonds and the value of that?
Well, I think, we can just look around and see who our friends are, and if we're older and we have access to groups that young people don't, we can invite young people to come with us, and if we're younger and we are going to events that, us golden oldies don't, but it is very important, I think, especially in activism, because I remember when things were worse, I have hope. And young people, because they see how shitty they are mad as hell. So we need each other. And I do think that age segregation, and I worry about all the communities that are put together by age, senior living, and I just think it's wrong. The Native Americans have a saying that the very oldest and the very youngest understand each other the best because you are closest to the unknown. And there is something to that, right? So it's good if we can just work on this in our own lives and just invite the group that isn't usually present to be present. And I want to put the emphasis on present, okay? Because as much as I love books, and as much as we look at screens, right? The truth is that we can't empathize with each other unless we are together with all five senses. And it isn't that we want to, depart from books or from the wonders of technology, that's fine, but we need to spend as much time with each other with all five senses as we do looking at a screen or a page. I asked my friendly New York neighbor neurologist if we produced, oxytocin is the famous tend and befriend hormone. If we produced that when we looked at a book or and she said, no, you have to be together with all five senses to empathize with each other. You can learn intellectually, wonderfully, but to know what somebody else is feeling, you have to be together. I'm grateful that you took time out of your lives to come here and be here tonight and hug each other in the beginning and introduce yourselves to each other. Because I do think that the higher incidence of sadness, depression, and even suicide can be correlated with the advent of so much technology in our lives, and we need to balance it.
often talk about the difference between communication and connection, and that connection is communication with empathy and compassion present. And I think especially during these times, it's so critical that we understand where we find empathy and compassion so that we can build them into how we communicate with each other.
And it is physical. I mean, when somebody, male or female, holds a baby, you're flooded with oxytocin. When you see someone having an accident, even if you don't know that person, you're flooded with oxytocin. You want to help. The human race could not have survived without that kind of immediate identification with each other and that empathy and communication of how we feel.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because whenever I speak at schools, I always tell people, especially early on, we're like, look around, what does your friend group look like? And I think that in this conversation about having intergenerational connections, we have to say, yes, you want to have friends who look differently than you and are from different backgrounds and different races and ethnicities, but get a 70-year-old in your clique too, because it's important, because there's so much to learn from each other. And it's funny, my friend Tess, who works with me, every time I see her mom, she comes to me and she goes, "Don't you forget about us older people. You speak to us too, and we all need to be listened to and heard." And I was like, "Yes, I got it. Don't you worry."
I never expected to be sitting here at 85. I'm 85. See, if you get old enough, you can get a hand just for saying your age. It's shocking. So I tell everybody on the street that I'm 85 because I'm trying to realize that it's true. And the secret of aging is you are still yourself.
Something you wrote in this book that I loved is one of your kind of famous parting lines whenever you give a speech, which is that you say, "Promise me that in the next 24 hours you will commit one outrageous act in the cause of justice." It could be as simple as saying, "Pick it up yourself," or as radical as telling each other our salaries. And if you do, I promise you two things. First, the world will be better by the very next day. Second, you will have such a good time that you will never again wake up saying, "Will I do an outrageous act?" Only, "Which outrageous act will I do today?" And I wanted to know, what was the last outrageous act you did?
Oh gosh, I have to think about that. Yeah, no, I think that is especially important right now, because right now we have a case of the shoulds, because the political situation, and we have this, I'm so sorry, he comes from a New York asshole who's in the president, but people who elected him mostly said he was a good businessman, so he could make a good president. He is a failure as a businessman. If he just invested the money he inherited, he would be richer than he is now. And I'm probably not supposed to be saying this, so this is probably one outrageous act, right? But what outrageous act I don't know, I mean, that's a really, really big challenge. I think it was asking for a lot of money for an important cause, right? And really a lot of money. I think that was outrageous, right? And nothing has happened so far. Okay.
Something that you wrote that I loved, because there was some crossover in Heart Talk as well on this one, is in Heart Talk I wrote, "Our wisdom doesn't just come from what we learn, but what we unlearn." And you wrote, "The first problem for all of us, men and women, is not to learn, but to unlearn." And I'd love to know, what are some of the most profound things you've had to unlearn, and what advice would you give to someone else to reflect on what it is within them they can unlearn?
Well, I think especially in my generation, we believed that everybody got married and their identity came with their husbands and they had children and that was it. Because I'm a 50s person, I'm not even a 60s person, okay? So we were told that, and I 100% believed that. So I was rebelling, but I was hoping no one would notice, if you know what I mean. I just kept putting it off. I'm doing that, I'm definitely doing that, just right now, not right now, okay. And then, fortunately, the women's movement came along and told us we didn't have to all live in the same way, that there was a choice. But it caused me, because I did not unlearn that, it caused me to live a deferred life. You know, I didn't fix up my own apartment. I didn't save money. I mean, all kinds of things, because I assumed that my real life hadn't begun yet. And since you can only live in the present fully, you can't live in the future. That was a kind of small little tragedy, because I hadn't unlearned that notion of what real life was. Fortunately, I mean, the women's movement saved me, because it came along and said, no, everybody doesn't have to live the same way. It's okay. You can fix up your apartment. I went out and bought antique sheets. It was orgasmic to buy candles.
Something I love from this book, you said, feel the fear and do it anyway. And I feel that to be true, but I would like to know kind of what makes you feel afraid or fearful, and then what motivates you to do it anyway, because I've found that when I talk to women across the world, you know, sometimes I was afraid, you know, knowing that my neighbor suffered more than me motivated me to do it anyway, or knowing that my mother's unlived dreams, or as my friend B. Mike writes, that's become kind of an anthem for people of color in this day and age, is I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And that's always been my motivation when I'm afraid, is that I always have that mantra I say to myself, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. So how could I not go out there and sit on a chair next to Gloria Steinem? And so I'd love to know what motivates you, and what makes you feel scared.
Well, when you're saying that, the most obvious thing to me is that I'm sitting here speaking in public, all right? Because I didn't ever speak in public until I was in my late 30s or early 40s, and only because I couldn't get published what I wanted to say about the burgeoning women's movement. And, you know, editors were saying, well, if we publish your article saying women are equal, we'll have to publish one right next to it saying women are not equal in order to be objective. I mean, that was, you know, you can't make this up, okay. And I was able to write. I had a political column in New York Magazine, which we had started and so on, but I couldn't write about the excitement that I felt, you know, that was just exploding. And I was getting invitations to speak. So I went to a speech teacher, and, you know, she said, well, you've been two things, a dancer and a writer, both of which mean you don't want to talk, of course. And I was really, really scared, but I really thought it was important. So who was fearless, Dorothy Pittman Hughes, whose photograph is out there, with our fists up.
Yeah, very famous photo.
And asked her if she would do it with me. And so we traveled for quite a while together speaking, which turned out to be a really good thing, because for a white woman and a black woman, especially in the South, but not only in the South, to be talking about feminism together was really crucial. Then she had a baby and wanted to stay home, so then Flo Kennedy, how many people here know the great Flo Kennedy? Okay. So then she is outrageous, Flo, as you know. I mean, in the South, they would say to us things like, some guy in the back would say, "Are you lesbians?" And she would say, "Are you my alternative?" You know, she always had an answer. And so by following the fear, I grew, and we found a way of speaking together that was really, I think, helpful to the whole movement. And I discovered how great it is to have a talking circle, you know, because I didn't like to speak, we always left as much time for audience discussion and carrying on as we did for speaking. And in that way, I discovered how incredibly smart audiences are. You know, somebody over there would ask a question and somebody over there would answer it. You know, we could just sit there and, you know, we have been sitting around campfires for millennia, you know, since human beings arrived. We're meant to be sitting together, telling stories, listening to each other, discovering we're not alone. And because also, even after I started to speak, I still didn't want to speak that much. I discovered that about audiences. And it has been a joy ever since, absolutely ever since. And in New York, there was a play done that was based on my life. And I said, fine, you can do Act 1, you can do anything you want, because I can't possibly understand my own life. You can understand, okay. But Act 2 has to be a talking circle. And it was. And that really, I think, was way better than Act 1, because people learned about it. It was just extraordinary. Something magical, special happened, and unexpected happened every night.
Yeah. I have really bad stage fright also, and I remember when I first started speaking publicly, I had this mantra I would say right before I got on stage when I would start to sweat and freak out. And it was, because I always thought about how, you know, it's also different when you have a different temperament, because some people get on stage and they all of a sudden switch on and have this different personality, and I was kind of this is basically I'm the same everywhere. And so I was always like, oh, I don't have a thing I do when I get on the stage, and so I was always nervous that I didn't have this charismatic person like Sasha Fierce or something. And so I had this mantra that was, as long as you are yourself, you can't fuck it up. And I always share that with any women who are looking to speak publicly, because it's a really helpful one to repeat to yourself before.
And if in the beginning you just say, I mean, people in public opinion polls fear public speaking almost as much as death, you know. So if you say you're afraid, or, you know, you're nervous in the beginning, people will be with you.
There was this part of your, there's this one story that you told in your book about meeting this woman who was supporting a different party. She was supporting the Republican Party, but her daughter, Ashley, was supporting the Democratic Party, and she wanted you and Ashley to meet so you met with her, and one of your takeaways was after, in kind of concluding the story, you said her mother may still prefer the opposition, but she isn't an adversary because she respects and allows differences. This is all the more important today when we have world leaders who don't respect differences. That lack of respect is dictatorship. And, you know, as we are all going into the holidays, where we will be sitting at our Thanksgiving tables with, you know, that one family member who you're like, oh, please don't sit me next to like uncle. And, you know, I would like to know if you had any tips for us as far as sitting at the table with your family members who have differing opinions, whether it's a political point of view or, and also how are you telling the difference between what you call co-conspirators and adversaries?
Well, that was the little story you cite was Ashley Judd, and it was Ashley Judd's mother, you know, who's also a wonderful singer and so on. We were at a conference together, And, you know, she differs in her political opinions from her daughter, but she knew that her daughter and I would love each other, you know, so she said, you must meet my daughter, and we've been friends ever since, all right? So that tells me that difference is okay with her. Yeah. You know, we didn't, we exchanged all kinds of information, we argued, it's important to argue, but it was a recognition of uniqueness and a furtherance of that uniqueness. So she is not an enemy to me at all, her mother, who's still with us, and, you know. It depends, I mean, I think what I'm thinking right now is slightly different, which is, I do believe that women's model of leadership or governance comes from the family. So we feel like we have to include everybody because you can't put somebody outside of the family. And I worry a little more that now we think we have to convince Trump supporters, right? Now, what worries me is that if you put, you know, there are 100 people on this side of the room who are ready to go and march and do whatever, and there are 30 on the other side of the room who say, no, you know, we're totally opposed. I worry that we as women with this family model will go over to the 30 and try to convince them instead of going forward with the 100. And since only a third of the country supports the ultra-right wing and, you know, anti-woman, you know, all of the Trumpian, yeah. I think the family model is not suitable now because we just need to get the majority out, you know, and, you know, right.
Simon and I talk about that a lot, that, you know, it's not about, especially in the upcoming 2020 elections, but it's not about trying to get people from one team to the other team. It's just getting those off the sidelines who are already on our team on the field and moving in mass.
Right.
And, you know, something I would love for you to expand on is you had this line, gender and race are fictions. Unique individuals are truth. Can you delve into that a little bit?
Well, I think, you know, I don't know what tribe or nation was and probably still is on the land where we are right now, but probably before Europeans showed up, which was only, what, 600 years ago, not that long, the culture, certainly Cherokee and a lot of the other languages don't even have gendered pronouns. They don't have he and she, you know, a human being is a human being. The model of governance is kind of concentric circles of consent. It's actually where our Constitution came from. It was modeled after the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy. We unfortunately managed to allow slavery and leave out women, you know. When Benjamin Franklin invited 4 Iroquois advisors to the Constitutional Convention to help, you know, create the Constitution, the first thing they said was, where are the women? Hello? Okay. But I think it's helpful it's helpful to me anyway to cite that because it tells me that we did invent gender in the sense of masculine and feminine. Patriarchy invented gender in order for masculine to dominate feminine and to control reproduction, just because we happen to have the one thing they don't have, which is wombs. If we didn't have wombs, we'd be fine. But so we are now in a time, I think, when we are challenging gender and people are crossing the boundaries of gender in a wonderfully brave and way. And we are beginning to challenge the idea that the amount of melanin in your skin, which is what, you know, race is, which really, I mean, we all came from Southern Africa originally. Some of us went to parts of the world where there was too little sun, so we lost melanin, some with too much of it. So sometimes I think the whole world is divided into two kinds of people, those who divide everything into two and those who don't, okay? So we are gradually, I think, becoming again people who see unique individuality and shared humanity rather than categories.
Something I'm so struck by is that you always reference a historical fact or the way our histories have worked and accurately tell those stories. And you cited Paula Gunn Allen's famous quote, "The root of oppression is the loss of memory."
That's a lovely quote. Yeah.
And the root of oppression is the loss of memory. And we talk about that a lot with this organization I work with that works on race relations in the South, because so much of why we don't understand the depths of slavery is because it's not taught accurately in schools, and that we've actually found that that's the starting place of why it's so difficult. And in this day and age where we don't disagree on a fact, we don't even agree on having the same facts or reality. How do you navigate that? And is it by making sure that this loss of memory is not ever present, so that it's constantly oppressing us currently?
Well, I think even without knowing our history, we can still see our shared humanity anyway. We don't have to plunge into a book or a course. We can sense it. We can empathize with each other. But it would be helpful if we did actually study history. I mean, in the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, there's a big something, a little lecture, and the guy is saying in the beginning, there are two things, history and the past, and they are not the same. And, history is very, very political. Why do we start with Columbus? This country did not start, why do we start after colonialism had underdeveloped? I mean, there's a wonderful book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. It kept Africa from developing and just using it for raw materials, because Africa was actually, if anything, somewhat more sophisticated in many of its systems of governance and so on, but we don't start there. So I hope that history really becomes history eventually, but I'm not going to wait for that to happen. But it's happening in a way because at least we now have African American history and women's history and gay and lesbian. Those didn't exist when I was, there was nothing but Aristotle telling me I had no soul,
Something I wanted to talk to you about, because especially if there's one thing that I feel people say right now is every question they have is whether it's how are you taking care of yourself or how are you staying active, especially during these times. And I think that, something I love that you always say is hope is a form of planning. And at a time where I do feel that hope is so critical, and I always lean on my friend Dre, a line from his book where he says, hope is the belief that our tomorrows can be better than our todays. Hope is not magic, it is work. And I wanted to know kind of what is your relationship with hope and maintaining it, and have you lost it? What was it like to have to regain it, if so, and how do you hold on to it?
No, I think hope is a form of planning. If our hopes weren't already real inside of us, we couldn't even hope them, right? So it's completely crazy and self-defeating to let people take hope away from you, because that is an idea of what could be. And that's what movements are based on. imagine why. Well, I can. I mean, if any human being is beaten down enough, probably it is impossible to hope, I suppose. But I don't think so. I mean, I'm a hopeaholic, let's face it. So.
Yeah, I think about that often, because even when you think of the deepest, darkest depths of slavery and how there was still so much hope, because only through hope could someone have the radical imagination that could dream up the Underground Railroad and the Civil Rights Movement, and et cetera. But, I'm going to open it up to the audience, but before I do, there was one last thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I loved the title of this chapter, Laughing Our Way to the Revolution. And I want to talk to you about joy and its place in movements, and laughter and its place in our lives, and how, laughter is actually a pretty serious thing you have to have. And I'd love for you to talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think it turns out, actually, that laughter is the only free emotion. You can compel fear, obviously. You can even compel love, because if someone is dependent for long enough, you enmesh with the person you're dependent on and believe you're in love. But no one can compel laughter. It happens when two things come together and suddenly make a third. When you see something, when you learn something for the first time, it is, and again, in Native American parlance, there is a spirit of laughter who's neither male nor female, and who who breaks into the unknown and says, if you can't laugh, you can't pray. So I think it's a pretty good guide to say, just don't go any place they won't let you laugh, all right?
Words to live by.
Including church or temple, don't go. I mean, if they won't let you laugh, you should not be there. And if you are laughing, no matter how, occasionally, no matter how difficult and how painful it is, if there's laughter present, you're having moments of freedom.
Well, now we're going to take a few questions from the audience, but before we do that, we have a couple questions from media. So I want to invite you up.
Thank you. My name is Lindsay Miller. I'm the News and Culture Director at Pop Sugar, and I think this is a question that perhaps both of you can speak to. Gloria, you spoke to this a little bit when you said, because you were there when things were worse, you have hope. But I'm wondering, given the title of your book, what advice you might give to young women who have maybe really only come into their awareness in this moment in time and are feeling a little bit more stuck in the pissed off place than the free place, how they can move forward or how they can harness that anger.
You go first.
I worry a little bit about the question because it's as if I have the answer, and I think actually each young woman has the answer. So my job is to support her, right? And if we don't get it, we just say, okay, I'm going to act on whatever unfairness I see, however small or large it may be. I'm going to do whatever I can all the time and find companionship with other people who are doing that. Then we'll get there. It's not looking up for advice. It's looking to your own sense of what is fair and what is unjust and acting on it. And then the two of us are there to support you.
Yes. I also think it's important to remember that there's nothing wrong with being pissed off. I think a lot of the times we're afraid to be angry, or we think that actually anger is a sign that something's wrong, and anger is a sign that something's wrong around us, not within us.
You have another question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Becca. I'm with Parentology, and listening to what you had to say about talk circles made me wonder, what do you think we can learn?
What is about what?
You were talking about talk circles, which made me think,
Talking circles.
yes,
Okay,
sorry. What can we learn from today's youth, and how can we help amplify their voices?
What can we learn from today's youth, and how can we help amplify their voices?
Oh.
Your speaker's facing you, so we're only hearing the back. That's why we can't hear.
I think the talking circle, can be, at home, in the office, anywhere, but we need, as I was saying in the beginning, we need the physical presence of other people in order to stretch our empathy, know that we're not alone, and be able to act. Every revolution that I know of, from the Chinese Revolution to the civil rights movement that started in black churches in the South, to the women's movement that started with consciousness-raising groups, remember that? It all starts with a small group of people, and small enough. The witches actually had it right, 13. Because it was small enough so everybody could talk, and 13 meant that you voted, right? And witches, of course, were just healers, they were not actually, right? I just think we need that as part of our lives and part of our activist lives, because it is that allows us to say, I'm thinking of doing this, get companionship, and really move forward one step at a time. It's way more likely than if we are alone.
Another question? More questions? I see one over there. If you want to stand up.
Thank you. Hi, Gloria Steinem. I'm 56 years old, and I don't remember a time when I was aware of the word feminism, when I didn't know who you were. Thank you. I started reading Ms. Girl in Tehran. Along with Vogue and Glamour, we would buy it from American magazines in Tehran. And then there came a time when I remember words that kind of came sketch comments that you made about the veil and women, and I thought, I don't know if she really understands what's happening here in Iran right now. And then in college, American Women's Court, to think about white stream feminism, and I thought, okay, that's Gloria. So I'm going to learn about these other women. And here I am now at 56 years old with a profound appreciation of what you've dedicated your life to, and a sad appreciation for the fact that you're so incredibly relevant still. I wish that you could retire happily in the woods, and that we would all be equal and your work would be done.
I'm doing what I love. I don't want to, I'm not a woods person.
I just wanted to give you, first of all, a moment of appreciation for someone who truly has a global appreciation for the work that you did and the impact that you've had on our imagination as women and what we can be when we grow up. I'm not always sure that you understand the resonance that you have beyond, and we really heard you, and it really made an impact on our lives. And there's a reason I grew up to get a PhD and become a professional woman, and you played a part in that, and I want to thank you for that. And my question for you is this. She asked me, she goes, do you have a question? when you get to be my age, you don't need to have questions, but let me just say, my question for you is this. At times like this, when hope seems a little bit hard, you're so energetic, you're still doing it. What is it that keeps you motivated? What is it gives you hope? Where do you find your strength?
Well, I find it with you. I find it, we find it with each other. And actually, when bad things happen, they are instructive. I mean, we are having a bad person at the top now in order to tell us what's wrong with the country. And as I travel, I have never seen the degree of activism I'm seeing now. I mean, people who didn't vote before are running for office. So it's expensive and it's dangerous. I'm not trying to downplay the danger, but I do think that we are woke in a way we would not have been otherwise, right?
We have time for one more question. See you over there.
Or an answer? We could have.
Want to please stand?
Hi, thank you both for speaking. I'm 22 and I grew up reading both of you. So I have a question of your generations. I am a part of Gen Z, and sometimes it feels like we are the underrated youth. We are the kids that are always on our phones that every generation looks down on and says like, oh my gosh, they're always on their phones. They're never going to do anything. But really, in this new administration, it's up to us because suddenly, for the first time in my life, so as someone who, to Gloria, has lived through the revolution, and now we have to start a new one, what is your advice to start the revolution or to continue a revolution that we kind of thought we didn't 100% need to fight so hard anymore, and now it's on the shoulders of us young Gen Zers and activists who have been preparing for the fight, but no one was listening? What's your advice for being heard when you're a little bit underestimated and still young?
Listen, anybody who underestimates you is crazy, okay? And the comparatively lower turnout of younger voters is something that I think we see rapidly changing. In fact, we see younger candidates for office than we ever had before, right? So don't let anyone tell you that your generation is, just don't listen to that, okay? You have the biggest stake in the future, obviously. So you have the biggest motive to make it a better future and to be an activist and to get your age group out there. And we are just here to make you look reasonable.
I have no advice for you. My advice would be for all of us, which is, at a time where we are saying to people that they need to speak up and they need to be heard and they need to be seen, we have to remember as the older generations that someone has to take responsibility to hear them and see them and listen to them. And so all I can offer Gen Z is that I will always be there to listen and hear you and allow for you to lead the way as the biggest stakeholders.
We have one more question over here from the follow.
Hi. Can you hear me? Hi. So I went to high school and college in the 70s, and you were always a huge inspiration to me and have continued to be in raising my daughter. excuse me, I'm very nervous. And I was also on the cover of Ms. in 1974. So this is an incredibly special evening for me. And if there's any way you could sign it, I would be thrilled to death.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, and I will carry that message back to the reuniting Ms. members. Right. Thank you.
But anyhow, thank you for all your inspiration.
Thank you.
Well, we're streaming live, so we have some I'm going to take a question from an online viewer. You are an inspiration to so many of us. This is from Sarah, by the way. She didn't say where she's from, but hi, Sarah, wherever you are watching. She would like to know you are such an inspiration to us. Who is inspiring you today? What feminist leaders are you watching and reading today?
Oh, there's so many. I can't even. You know who Ai-jen Poo is? You know, she's an organizer of household workers, and now is organizing. But I mean, you know, they're just so many. And the three young black feminists who started Black Lives Matter, and I still don't think that people know that it was three young black feminists who started Black Lives Matter. And given the violence against black women, I think we're going to have Black Women's Lives Matter as additional. There are just so many, right? And here's my real feeling. I just had to wait for some of my friends to be born.
Well, I think what we have experienced is this supreme talking circle. Thank you very, very much. What a treat, what a privilege, because we are going to do our selfie. Just a few housekeeping notes. We really do want to wish everyone a joyful, safe, happy, light-filled, love-filled holiday season. We will see you January 16th at our next salon featuring Lynn Twist, who happens to be in the audience with us tonight, the author of The Soul of Money. And we encourage anyone who is not a Visionary Woman member to please go to the Visionary Women membership desk and become a member. We have lots of benefits and opportunities of membership. We are delighted that you are here. We're now going to take this big selfie. Please participate. Thank you again, Cleo and Gloria Steinem. Please, 2 minutes.